Hello everyone, Reki here, giving into the hype and making an analysis video for the Final Fantasy XV Royal Content Battle Updates and the Comrades Update. It's just like oh so long ago, back when I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and episode Dusk Eye was on the horizon. Those were good times. Anyway, this analysis will contain some minor spoilers, but nothing for the big plot beats. If you've seen the Royal Edition trailer and the Comrades Update trailer, then you're good. Let's start with that, and specifically, Armiger Unleashed. We know a couple details about Armiger Unleashed already. First, you need to complete some kind of side quest or just straight up find an accessory that becomes available to you after you collect all 13 Royal Arms. Personally, I think this means that you need to drive the boat somewhere, but that's just me. This means that you cannot get Armiger Unleashed any earlier than near the end of Chapter 13. Well, halfway-ish. The other detail is that
it's not just about having these new powerful flashy attacks you can use. There's a whole extra combat system involving getting the right timing down when you input the command in order to build up combos. You can slowly increase the number of hits in your combos. And high-level players can really make up some amazing attacks out there.
It's an advanced playstyle, skill-based, and utilizes timed mechanics. As much as I like 15's combat and dig into the mechanics to do the fun stuff, those are not really things I would say about 15's combat, hence my piqued interest in this system in particular. Now let's take a closer look at some PC Gamer footage. I'll be splicing in a little bit of footage from the Royal Edition trailer, as well as, surprise surprise, some footage from the original Final Fantasy XV 2013 reveal trailer. Ooh, isn't that exciting? Let's take a look. Now the first second or so is still image. The game never pauses for character swapping or for using the techniques wheel, so it's probably from footage being paused in a video player. I originally thought this would be something to do with character swapping. Which brings me to the fact that this is either an upgraded Armiger, which you activate with L1 plus R1, or a new character quote for the character swapping feature. It has the activation flare that Armiger has in the base game, but it also has a trigger animation like a character swap. We know that Armiger Unleashed uses an item that needs to be equipped in order to use it, so it could just replace the old Armiger and you still activate it with L1R1, or it could activate a new character using down on the D-pad in the character swap menu, because since you can't swap to any guest characters in Final Fantasy XV, that down on the D-pad is always available, unlike, say, with the technique wheel where you can use guest techniques. Getting into some of Noctis' actual moveset, we see that his warp opener is some kind of like blink attack where he just zooms forward and hits dudes with his sword. It kind of looks like it leaves a delayed AoE explosion, but we'll see that in a second. Moving on, Noctis perfect dodges / blinks, which is technically the ability's name, and does a counterattack that uses the same animation as the Ring of the Lucii Holy blink attack, where he like explodes in magic, but this one Noctis has some swords spinning around him and does damage. It's pretty cool. It can also be used in the air, according to the Royal Edition trailer, which is weird. Noctis' warp kind of looks like the teleport dash a la the Cerberus rifle or the Rings warp, where Noctis doesn't actually throw a weapon and warps to it, he kind of just teleports. It seems like it cancels the recovery from his attack so that you'll be able to attack, dash away, and continue a combo without having to wait for Noctis to get back to a neutral stance. That is pretty cool, and that's what a lot of action games use in order to keep the action fast-paced and string combos together. Then we see Noctis use a new technique. Now there are 4 techniques available to you when you use the Armiger Unleashed. There's Royal Cleave, Apocalypsis, Dynastic Stance, and Legacy of the Lucii. This technique right now is either, in my opinion, Dynastic Stance or Legacy of the Lucii, but it's hard to tell what exactly it's doing because prior to this, we only see Noctis do 2 basic attacks, and then he's doing a bunch of unique things. What I think this does is it basically activates versus mode, as I call it, in that it adds additional attacks from Phantom Swords, kind of like if you played Dissidia NT, it works like that. Or if you go back to the Final Fantasy XV 2013 trailer, it kind of looks like that, where Noctis attacks, and then Phantom Swords rain down and keep the enemy in hit stun, meaning they can't attack because they're staggered, and you can follow up and do some combos. We also see Noctis doing a backflip that kind of looks like a Blink or Impervious, but there's a distinct lack of stylistic slowdown, so this is probably part of his basic Blitz combo. Similarly, there's a vertical warp attack that's probably part of the Blitz. In fact, I think this whole string of attacks Noctis does is the basic Blitz combo, because as you can see, he does a little finisher at the end. Technique 2, I'm pretty sure this is Royal Cleave. It sure looks like a cleave. It's just a gigantic nuke. Nothing super special. And of course, the real cool looking one. I think personally this one is Apocalypsis. It looks like a giant AoE nuke. It looks rad. But there's nothing that looks kind of like Lucii-ish. So I think this is Apocalypsis, and that Legacy of Lucii is actually just unseen. Unless, of course, that was the first technique we looked at. And then Dynastic Stance is the one we haven't seen. Who knows? Now, moving on to some Royal Edition footage. Well, technically, we've seen this already. After Noctis does the aerial version of the Blink counter, he then dashes backwards in midair, kind of like he's air dancing with swords or spears, and then does what looks a lot like the original Armiger's Warp Strike. A lot of you don't know this, but the original Armiger has a Warp Strike where if you target and press triangle, Noctis jumps in the air and then rains down swords. It has a cool little combo. It's garbage, don't use it in the base game. But this looks like that. The weird thing is, if you look at the targeting reticule on the Mystic, when Noctis actually does this attack, it never ever locks on. Meaning that this attack is not a Warp Strike. Of course, if you played the game, you would know that in order to Warp Strike, you have to be locked onto something when you press triangle. So this is just part of his basic Blitz combo? There's a follow-up to the Blink counter? I don't know what this is, but it's cool. Future Reki cutting in here for a second. When I originally wrote this script, I was working off the PC Gamer footage, which looked atrocious. Now that I have access to the direct capture version of the same footage, we can see that this ring of crystal particles actually appears in the lead footage as well, basically confirming that it is indeed the timing mechanic that was talked about. The ring indicates the timing of the button press. You can see it happen 3 successive times in the string, when Noctis does the double slash, into a thrust, into the vertical attack, into another double slash. It's not clear exactly what benefits come from hitting the timing though, since we said it also occurs after an air step and not just an attack. It could be that certain attacks are only triggered with these timed hits, as if they were follow-up actions. They could add damage or stagger to his attacks, or they could just be used to cancel recovery lag. This mechanic is at least distinct from the dash cancel, since the dash cancel doesn't have this ring effect. Now for some general information about how Armiger Unleashed works, all based off the very limited time we see the UI in the Royal Edition trailer. Whether it replaces the original Armiger or is just a character swap, Armiger Unleashed is a time-limited form. Thankfully, it seems like a pretty generous time limit, so you can do most fights entirely in that state, as long as you have the gauge. Also, on the weapon wheel, you can see nothing. Noctis is always seen using his sword in the footage, so we can pretty safely assume his weapon is locked to that, unlike the base Armiger where he uses random weapons. When Noctis uses what I think is a Dynastic Stance technique, though, Noctis pulls out the Sword of the Father, and since that technique might alter the moveset, perhaps Noctis could pull out different Royal Arms for different movesets or properties? That one's just pure speculation, though. I'm not holding out my hopes, honestly. I think it's just going to be the Phantom Sword upgrade. The technique gauge, speaking of, now constantly refills, and Noctis curiously has no MP anymore. Now you can just warp and dodge to your heart's content. Go nuts. Kill them all.